Hello, everybody.
Hey, Sarah.
Let's see. We've got a good amount of folks here. I was worried that everyone was just going to see the sunshine and flee away from from Zoom. So thank you all for being here. Superintendent and McKay, are you ready to get started?
Yes, we are.
Okay, beautiful. Well, I'd love to just start with a little bit of a welcome prompt, and then I'll turn it over to Ryan. You can run us through your slides. Is just if you weren't in this meeting on this beautiful summer day, what would you be doing with your time? And you can put it in the chat. Kayaking. Oh, that's nice. Swimming. Beautiful. Yeah, I'd be anywhere close to the water, picking up my kid from preschool. Thank you to whoever is doing that in lieu of you, Ariel. Weeding. Oh, well, Kate, I'm glad you're here. Awesome, awesome, Jim. So, well, just thank you for giving up some of those things to be here tonight. You'd actually be in a different meeting. Well, love that when you have competing meetings. Yeah, so tonight, hopefully we'll be able to fit everything into our hour and a half. We've got some big kind of decisions to make tonight, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Superintendent to kind of run through what we're looking at tonight.
Great. Thank you for that. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy July. As Sarah said, it's certainly beautiful outside. We have a handful of things we want to run through. One is the last time we met, we were preparing for June feedback sessions from the community. And so just want to remind folks of that, as well as our process that we're going through and where we're at in that process. We're then going to look at the elementary proposal and layer on the future forecasts with that as well. So McKay is going to orient us to that because that is sort of the next part. And then we're going to go back to middle school and see if we can get to a spot where we have a proposal that we feel good about that we're iterating off of. Sorry, my mouse just jumped here a little. There we go. So just a reminder, because it's been a couple of minutes since we have met, the boundary committee, when you first got established, the first couple of meetings, established 5 priorities to guide the work, looking at utilization, demographics, maintaining neighborhood schools, considering transportation and the impact that any changes have, and minimizing the number of students or families that are impacted by the move. And so we know that these 5 priorities all somewhat compete with each other whenever we make a change. But these were the 5 priorities that we wanted to keep in mind with this work. And just a reminder on the process. Here's sort of the whole process laid out. I'm going to put up where we're at. There we go. So our middle school scenario, we're going to look at today, trying to get to a final draft that, or maybe one more meeting to get to a final draft that we can get community feedback on. We did host community engagement sessions in June. We tonight are going to layer on the 5 and 10-year enrollment projections and do some adjustments to the elementary scenario as a result of those. We are planning additional community engagement opportunities the weeks of October 13th and 27th. So already looking forward to those final potential community engagement sessions, and then knowing that wherever the committee sort of lands on their recommendations to the board, that we'll want to talk with this committee around an implementation plan and how we move this work forward. I'm going to do a couple more before I open it up to questions, just to walk through it. When we did the community engagement, I'm just sharing with the committee so that you can see the slides and the questions that the community gave feedback on. So we had 4 guiding questions for the elementary scenario, and this is the slide that we used with them. What positives do you see? What potential concerns? Are there specific adjustments you would recommend? And are there other big issues that the committee should be considering? The guiding questions for the middle school sought out feedback on community preference for maintaining 3 middle schools. Got some feedback on how to prioritize balancing utilization, school size, student demographics, and elementary feeder patterns. Feedback on whether or not expeditionary learning schools needed to have a clear connection in feeder patterns, and whether or not we should adjust transportation guidelines in alignment with this work. Several members of the committee joined. We got feedback from the survey, a small amount of feedback, but we captured a lot of notes in the meeting. And so I'll share out the trends I sort of walked away with and would open it up to anybody else on the committee who also wants to share from those 4 community engagement sessions, the feedback we got. So the themes that really resonated is supported the direction of the work on the elementary schools, but generally the vibe was like feeling pretty positive about it. And they really resonated with balancing utilization, maintaining neighborhood elementary schools. So there really wasn't an appetite for closing one. And there was a fair amount of feedback about making sure that as we're going through this, we're considering pre-K, changes to early childhood support and special education programming. The community listening sessions were a little more mixed on maintaining 3 middle schools, but I would say generally prefer maintaining 3 schools without a compelling reason otherwise. So if there was a financial reason, student enrollment, they were more open in their feedback around going to a smaller number of middle schools, but generally preference was to maintain. There was a desire to lower the threshold. So right now, middle schoolers have to live 2 miles away from their middle school to get transportation, or have a hazard zone in between them and the middle school. And the feedback was to lower the threshold. There was a general idea of having less splitting of elementary schools to different middle schools. And there wasn't any sort of strong desire to maintain an expeditionary learning feeding pattern, which would be a Presumpscot-King relationship. Let me pause there in this update. First, just see if there's anyone else who wants to jump in on community listening sessions and feedback that came out of that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Damon.
Yeah, I think it's a good summary, consistent with, I went to the listening session at East End School, and heard a lot of the same things. I think there's general anxiety about closing schools, and understandably, and people do understand the need to look at redistricting though, and achieving the balance. So yeah, I think I was wondering too, is there going to be some kind of a summary document of the notes and I guess the survey results? As you said, there weren't maybe a lot. It'd be nice to see what people are saying.
Yeah, the survey really had so little participation. I mean, it was under 30. I don't remember what it was, maybe under 20. And so I don't think there's going to be a ton from that, but I do think we're getting to a spot in the work where having a regular update to the community about it through some sort of like summary posted on the website as well as pushed out social media wise and letter would make sense. And so I think that's a really good idea, and I can include that in something getting ready for back to school. Ariel.
Just to add on to that, in terms of the publicity push, because the folks I talked to before when we were promoting the listening sessions in the survey largely hadn't really heard about them. I'm wondering if it might be useful to try to get something into like the Press Herald, that kind of thing, because I think that once the, once the changes are done, that is one of the forums where we often see community feedback popping up, and so it might be nice to kind of like try to capture attention in that way during this part where there actually is a lot of interest and need for community input. Maybe just like, I think you all are doing everything you can through the schools channels, but trying like also something broader like that might be worth.
That makes sense. I made note of that. We can reach out to the main school reporter at the Press Herald and see if they'd be interested in doing something around that. And the other thing, I don't remember if it was you who mentioned it, but somebody mentioned it about doing some active communication within our preschools and our partner preschools. And so we do naturally have that relationship, so we can do that as well. In our early childhood places. So yeah. Last call.
Just one more thing on the survey. Maybe it'd be worth another try or second round, in conjunction with the fall listening sessions. I think part of it, the lower participation rate may have been due to timing, where the end of school year, people have other things going on. It's not maybe on the radar as much. So whereas the start of the school year, I mean, people are maybe more likely to be engaged. So might be worth putting it back out there.
That makes sense. Yep, I appreciate that. We can do that. Priscilla. So do you still have your hand raised? I can't tell. Nope. Okay. We're also going to be moving along some decisions today. So just a reminder of a decision protocol that Sarah introduced us to a couple of meetings ago. So remember, just a fist of 5 around that, where a fist is really a vote no. It is objecting and we're not going to move forward until we're able to work through that and have that discussion. A 5 being I like this a lot and I think it's the best possible decision. 3 in the middle, and you can sort of see the scale there. And so just we will use this again as we discuss the elementary scenario and the middle school as we continue to move forward. With that, I'm going to take down my share, and McKay, I'm going to turn it over to you to maybe walk us through just real quick the forecasting, and then how it really, if we can get to how it really plays out in the elementary model. I think that's the best.
Okay, that sounds great. I made a little presentation to kind of walk us through this, but I'll be quick with it. I know that it's a lot of information, but I think if you understand the forecasting factors, it will make more sense. And I'll point out a couple of things that I found in the forecasting as we go through. So this is just kind of a recap. We haven't revisited this in quite a few months, but forecasting data is based off of 3 factors. These are the ingredients. You've got your birth factors. That's what gets us to your kindergarten cohort. That's how we predict that. Your mobility, which is your natural inward or outward mobility, also known as grade progression ratios, essentially how many kindergartners make it to 1st grade, make it to 2nd grade, make it to 3rd grade. So it gets those apartment movement, it gets, more mobile communities. It kind of picks up on that. And then the student yield factors is what we apply to our development, our housing development. So your student yield factors are, you can expect from a single family detached housing development to get more students out of those in the future. as opposed to apartments. Affordability, affordable housing and single family detached tend to have slightly higher student yield factors than multifamily attached or single family attached. And so that's how we predict how many students might be coming into the landscape in the next 5 and 10 years. You bring all these together, you smush them together, and you get your student forecasts. We start by verifying the data that we have. We geocode the students, meaning we take the student's address and we place a point where that student lives. And we have 4 years of that. So we look at 3 historic years and the current year. When I say current year, we are talking about October of 2024. So it's an apples to apples comparison year after year. So we have 3 historic years, and then this year, the base year is based off of the October census at the school. It's also the most stable period of enrollment. And so it gives us our best idea of how many students are on the landscape. And then we divide your district into these study areas. We've talked a lot about study areas. We've seen them on the map as we're kind of reassigning those. So that allows us to look at the forecast at a smaller geography and then summarize out to whatever geography we'd like. Student density, this has not changed. You've got these high density pockets here in the downtown area, but you also have them throughout your district. This is a closer look at your birth rate factors. Maine, it's difficult to get. Our last year of birth data is 2022 for your geography. And so we don't have 2023 data, and we likely won't get 2024 data for another year. Maine is a little bit behind on that. So this is the best data that we have going forward. We have up until 2022, and you can see a general, it's a bit of a decline, but it's not a huge decline in births. But there is, you're working with some declining data, and your base data is based on the 2019 birth year, which would be your 2024 kindergarten year. And so there's a bit of a dip that we're working with this year's kindergarten data, which results in a slightly lower kindergarten cohort. And then these are the birth factors that we put into the forecast going forward. So you'll see this reflected in the kindergarten data. You're not going to see a huge increase in kindergarten unless it comes from development, and you don't have a ton of development within your district. So but birth rate fairly stable comparatively speaking to other districts. And so that stays mainly around 99%. Your mobility factors. So we look at this grade progression ratio. So for example, anything that's blue means inward mobility. You're getting more 8th graders than you had in 7th grade that live within Ocean Avenue. We recognize that there's no 8th graders or 7th graders that attend Ocean Avenue. We're just talking about the geography, right? So we're trying to get how the grade structure moves through the system in these cohorts, in these geographies. So you can see that for, say for Presumpscot, you have a bit more outward mobility than you do for, say Talbot has a little bit higher inward mobility. Rowe is pretty stable with their mobility. And so you have a lot more outward mobility in your elementary and middle grades, and more inward mobility in your high school grades. That could be because of parochial schools, students attending elementary and middle and then coming into high school. We also see a lot of outward mobility 5th to 6th. So that could be a parochial school or private schools in the area. So those trends are pretty standard throughout other school districts as well. Ocean Avenue also has pretty good inward mobility compared to the other attendance areas. And then your development. So these are the developments on the landscape. Yes.
So sorry, quick
Yeah,
question on the previous slide.
Yes.
So this says school year 2021 to 2024. So that this is sort of like averaging out that 3-year period.
It is, it's a 3-year average of 4 data points. Yep, so it takes, so for these, the past 3 historic years and this year, we found an average of, for Lyseth, for example, if you have 100 kindergartners in Lyseth, that you would expect 102 kindergartner or first graders for that next grade up. And going backwards, you'll also see that for Lyseth, you would lose 5 first graders into second grade because of the students that reside on the landscape. And so we generally see an uptick from kindergarten to first, and that's again private kindergarten. So in some of these areas, you might be gaining some first graders that had private kindergarten elsewhere. But yes, that shows you year over year at a 3-year average based on 4 data points.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And this is, I will say, this is agnostic of development data. Housing development data does not play into this. This is to try to get resales, how many kids are moving into the area, or how many maybe apartment complexes that students are moving around more. So it gets at the natural mobility within your district. This is the housing developments that we have on the landscape identified. Not all of these are phased, as some of them are still so far out that we have too many questions to include them into the forecast. But this is what we've identified on the landscape so far from working with municipalities and calling developers. The important thing to know is how these housing developments influence future students. So if you have 100, you only have 1 that is identified as a single family detached development. If you had 100 units, you could expect 24 students, K through 12, to come out of that housing development. And you can also, one thing that I also want to point out is that your single family attached, your apartments and your multifamily attached are lower. You do also have a low single family detached student yield factor, and lower than some that I've seen. Usually we have that up to like 0.5. It used to be like 1 and 2. But now you're expecting much lower student yields, and that goes to affordability. It goes to the types of development that is being developed on the landscape. And so I think it's important to revisit this to remind folks of how policy influences your data. It's a side note, but it is an important piece because what we utilize is residence-based. And so we are utilizing their 377 students that live within East End attendance area. And that's what we are using when we look at boundaries. When we look at where students are coming from and where they attend from, you actually have 391 students in seats at East End in October of 2024. And so this is a look from enrollment, which is what we think of when we walk into the school. This is a look from boundaries, and that's what we're focused on here. So just to mention that, and then you've seen this before, but it's residence-based, and this is what it looks like for enrollment-based. So it's an important piece to keep in mind when we're doing this work. We can't forget about this piece, but this piece is driven by your policy. And then, popped around. Same thing for middle school. I combined the middle school and the high school. You have three high schools. We have them coded as residents, as being Deering High School, full on knowing that your students attend all 3. But this gives you an idea of where you essentially have 2,055 resident high schoolers, 9 through 12. And this is where they attend. And then this is the number of students that come in from out of district to attend those high schools. So it is smushed this time. It was separated last time, so keep that in mind. Okay, so now after we take all of this information into consideration, we push it into the district-wide forecast. The thing that you should know about your district-wide forecast is that it's fairly stable. You have pretty stable PK through 5. It is increasing a bit, especially in that long term, and that could be due to some of the newer developments that we included on the horizon in this forecast. Your 6-8 is set to increase as well by a similar amount, and your 9th through 12th, that is set to actually decrease. And that is likely because you have a cohort, a very small cohort that was affected. I believe this is coming through. So 2nd grade during COVID, smaller cohort, as well as 3rd grade. The 2nd and 3rd grade are now down here in 6th and 7th. And as this percolates through, that's going to start affecting your high school students, and that's why you get a bit of a downward trend in your high schools. And incidentally, you have pretty stable, as I was just showing, to fluctuating birth rates. And so as the birth rate is staying stable, that's going to bring a more stable, higher cohort going up into it. And so that's why you have a lift in your elementary and your middle school. And then if we look at this, we kind of diving through a lot of the stuff, but really wanted to focus on this because this affects your scenarios in particular. Pretty stable on most of these, except for these are important call outs, is that Reiki is set to decline by 8.2% and 11.4% in the 5 and in the 10-year forecast. And Row is set to increase by 11.1 and 12.9 in the 5 and in the 10-year. And so those were pieces that we didn't have in front of us when we were doing our work, because we're just basing it on the 2024 current student population. These don't affect, I will say, these pieces don't affect your scenarios that much, but there is a play here between these two that I think we should further discuss when we're talking about scenarios. And with that, I will pause for questions, and then I'll go back into starting to look at existing elementary schools with the forecast, and then scenario 4 that you presented to community with the forecast. That was a lot of information. Yes, Sarah?
Yeah, just a couple things. Just highlighting what Ariel put in the chat, the East End like splitting between a decline and an increase. Is that right? On that last slide right there, yeah.
Yes. Yep. And we can look at that's a good call out. Let me go to the East End. To the East End, it's what is happening here in the East End is it's popping into, so you're at 420 resident East Enders, and then students. It fluctuates. It's not a huge fluctuation, and we're talking about essentially a pop down of 10 students in the 10-year, and then but most of that, it's just not picking up on this snapshot. So it is overall an increase. This is likely because you have a smaller cohort leaving and a bigger cohort coming into kindergarten predicted. And so you actually have an increase of 420 to 443. This is a bit of a blip on the landscape.
Okay, that's super helpful. And then my other question was just around the housing developments and like what definitions you are using to be an apartment versus affordable. and just like, I'm wondering if maybe we could like look at, like if we have a list or something, because I know that there's people in this committee that work in housing or around that, and I don't know, just making sure that we have them all that we know about.
Yeah, that came mainly from the city of Portland's affordability tracker, and then also digging down and trying to dig into some more information. But that came from originally from the city, and then they have a tracker that we also follow as well. If it is affordability can be a affordability can be a misnomer, just because when we think about affordability, like in Portland, Oregon, it's the median income is usually so high that like the actual affordability is not helping out the folks that actually need affordable housing. So it's a little bit separate from what am I trying to say? It tends to be a difficult thing to deal with on the landscape. Also, if we don't have enough affordable housing, if we don't have a big enough sample size, the way that we develop our student yield factors is by looking at the number of units of that type within your district, and looking at the number of students that live within that housing type. If there is not enough of a sample size created in the last 5 to 10 years, we tend to utilize other indications of student yield factor. In this case, I applied the single family detached student yield factor to the affordable, because I know that it's likely going to be higher, but we don't have the sample size that we need to actually get a good student yield factor for affordable housing. So that is a caveat, and it is something that we have a list of the development, so I can get that to you as well.
Thanks, that's helpful. Priscilla, you want to jump in?
Can I just jump in and ask McKay to clarify one other thing before you go, Priscilla?
Yes.
McKay, can you speak clear with what is the factor that gets a potential development as a dot on here versus one where you say the forecast is too far out? Like what's the line that's used?
So that is a little bit of a that's a bit of investigation. It's a bit of a if this area has been sitting for a really long time, if I see it go into litigation, if I see that, you know, it came up and then it's been sitting, we didn't have a plan. It came up in a planning meeting 5 years ago, and it's been sitting there and there have been issues. That's one where we put to kind of unknown or inactive. If something is active, if there is land moving, we can see that on Nearmap, our high imagery application that we utilize. If we see that there's ground moving, then that's an active. If we can see active building, that's active. And then planned comes from, has it been platted? Was it in a planning meeting? Was it approved? What stage is it in? When I can see something is actually happening, that's when it goes into the planning phase. That is usually the 0 to 5 year horizon that we're phasing those in. It also depends on if developers actually get back to us. So a lot of times we're contacting developers and trying to get more specific information on when they're set to be occupied. And then the last one is future, and future is the one that is much more anecdotal and much more have a feeling for it. If something's not moving, you hear from other developers that something is not happening or something is happening, but it's got issues. Sometimes we will put that in the forecast and sometimes we will not. There are specific ones that I decided to not include. This one here near the Row school, that one was not included because there has been so much back and forth, and I don't have enough concrete evidence to say that this is going to go on the landscape, that this is going to be built. If it is going to be built, I don't have any faith that it will be built in the next 5 years. So, and that goes into our also the accuracy of our forecast. That's why we feel much more confident about our 0 to 5. Our 5 to 10 has this dial of we think that this is what's going to happen, but it's really out of our control, and really up to the market and the developers and the planners. Does that answer that question? Great. Yes, Priscilla?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, because I couldn't speak the other time. I think my questions were asked by Sarah about the housing development. Can you just clarify what is the housing that you mentioned that you didn't include? Is that the one near Douglas Street?
I would have to dive in and look, but this one was a new one that came to my attention. I think in February. It wasn't a new one. It is I believe it's the
Barron Center, right?
yes, thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Yeah. And that one I did not feel confident about putting it in because there wasn't enough information leading to that leading me to think that that's actually going to go on. Now, our residential development research will continue, and so for this year there will be another outreach and another campaign to research all of the developments on that you see here, and then try to identify any newer ones. So we potentially will have more information, but if it stays fairly stagnant like it has been, then it will likely not be included unless if there sometimes folks know things that I don't know. Sometimes planners don't know things that developers know. So I'm open and happy to accept any information that anybody has.
I mean, if you have a list that you could share with us, I think that would
Yes.
be great because then I can help take a look at that. But also,
Yeah.
I mean, I probably know as much as you do, and a lot of information that we know comes from like the community or from the news. It's not like a definite answer. So I get it. The other question that I had is just a clarification. When you were talking about the enrollments and the policy, does that include the specialized programs?
Yes, so this is in when you say policy, we are literally looking at where, so there, for example, there are 377 students that live within East End. Of those 377, 333 attend East End. 2 of those students that live in East End attend Longfellow. 2 go to Lyseth, 12 go to Ocean Avenue. And so I don't know the causation of why those students live here and go to the school. I can just show it on here that they don't attend their assigned school.
But if they like the BREAThe program, that will be included in those numbers, right? Right, Ryan? Yes, okay, thank you.
And did you have any other questions?
No, I had more question, but it was the same questions that Sarah asked, so.
Gotcha. I will point out that it is really helpful to know the pre-K, since the pre-K is not necessarily an assignment. And so this pre-K call out down here can be really helpful for the district to recognize that there's 63 pre-K students that live within the Reiki attendance area. There are 63. It's not but where they live, but they go to here. So I think I had presented an internal document with where preschoolers live and where they go so that the district can utilize that as a help to help them in program placement. But pre-K is called out as a separate line there.
Thanks, McKay. Want to go to Damon or Dr. Warren? Did you want to get in on the pre-K conversation or?
Yeah, just a clarification, just because I don't want people to misunderstand. because we have pre-K classrooms and partner organizations, but we still have to have them affiliated with schools, those numbers are inflated. There's actually only one classroom at Reiki proper with 18 students. And then there are 3 classrooms at partner organizations outside of our buildings that are affiliated with Reiki. So that's why you're seeing such a large number there. And we are about to actually take 8 of those and move them into Talbot. So that will go up a bit.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Damon, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is great. Just to offer from the planner's perspective, I guess. And I think it's important to think about the error bars here, or as far as our purpose is concerned, and sort of allowing for us to perhaps miss some development and have capacity to accommodate those students. So one thing we might want to be thinking about is, I think what your process here has captured very well is a lot of the larger developments. It may not capture infill development, and there is some reason to think there may be greater infill development coming because the legislature just passed a law, LD 1829, which will lead to significant density increases, especially off peninsula, everywhere in the city, really. But it could lead to creation of additional single-family detached lots in our off peninsula areas of the city, which would be more likely, as you said, to have school-age children. So it might be something to reach out to the city planners and code enforcement as well, because planners, as I can say from experience, don't always know what's going on at the individual development level, because that's handled by code enforcement. So definitely would be useful to talk to those people on city staff and get their perspective and try to see what they may have as far as you know, some suggestions on numbers of, especially of the smaller projects. That way we can maybe create a little bit of an estimate for you know, an upper bound scenario perhaps, to help us, you know, inform us as we go into this.
That's I appreciate that. That's a really good point. To that point, I work with another district in Virginia, and their population is expanding pretty steadily, and they don't have a lot of development. And usually the only way to combat that is by looking at birth rates and hoping that your birth rates are going to increase. But what they're dealing with is resales. So what is happening there is it's resales. It's not necessarily infill, but it's also age structure of their demographics. So they have a large population that's about to age out of 55 to 65. And so as they are heading into, there's a lot of 55 plus development on the landscape, and they're being replaced by smaller, younger families. And so that's where they're getting their inward mobility. And just to mention, this is where we usually pick up that inward mobility. If there's resales or if there is infill, we usually pick it up in this natural mobility piece because we don't generally track anything under 10 units. But that would be really helpful for the city if they have any anecdotal data, because we don't forecast that. If they have any anecdotal data that we can scrub from them to try to understand where that infill is kind of identified and likely to go in, at least if we had an area so we could say, okay, on top of the row situation, we also need to look at infill because this is where this probably will go in. So we will reach out to the city again.
Just one thought to add on top of Damon's, and then I think we should probably get to the scenarios, which is, you know, I think like the Barron Center, some of the proposals were specific populations. So I do think that like I don't know where that level of information comes in, because I do think it could really affect the pieces that we're, you know, trying to balance. And so I just think it's like, yes, figuring out like what is the margin of error, but then also making sure that that includes kind of if there is a bigger swing in certain populations.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think with that, if we can go ahead and move to scenarios, that would be great.
Yeah, so I will jump down to scenarios, but one thing that I wanted to point out was specifically in row, and this will come into a little bit bigger play when we get to scenarios. But row, we are seeing potentially the largest increase. And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit to see what was potentially happening there. And if you look at row, there is this really small cohort that was kindergarten in 2021. That was 58 students. That went up to that's a big jump, over 20 kids, and now it's staying around 80 to 85. And so you have this drop down of this tiny cohort that's coming, not tiny, a smaller cohort that's coming through the system, and they will age out of elementary school in 2027 and be essentially replaced by these larger cohorts coming in. And so that's why you have a little bit of a dip this year. You didn't have as many students coming in, 80 to 82, 86 to 74. So there was a little bit of a loss there, but we expect these cohorts to be fairly strong. And that's where you're getting your increase. So it's not so much driven by development in this area. There is some development that is increasing this, but not by a lot, I don't suspect. And I think it's mainly because you have a smaller cohort that's going to hit middle school in 2027 and essentially be replaced 64 fifth graders by 82 kindergartner. And so that's and then it will stabilize. That's why you see this kind of stabilize out. So I wanted to mention that because I think it is important when we're looking at scenarios. So before we get to scenarios, I just wanted to look at the existing boundaries with the new forecast on top. And so I know that this is a little bit hard to read, but I wanted to try to get it all on one page. So this might be a little fuzzy, but essentially you're dealing with a little bit of a kind of a blip in the 5-year for East End, but pretty much pretty flat. A little bit of an increase in the 10-year, but again, we want to take 10-year with a grain of salt. Longfellow is pretty stable throughout the forecast. Lyseth has a little bit of a blip on the opposite direction, a little bit of increase in the 5-year, but pretty stable. Ocean Ave, fairly stable. Presumpscot, stable. Reiki is expected to decrease by 10% in the 10-year. Again, grain of salt, but there is expected to be a 7% decline in the next 5 years. That could be aging in place or not having the development to offset natural outward mobility. And then row, you have the opposite going on where you do expect to see a larger increase in the next 5 years because of that grade cohort. Small grade cohort just filtering through, larger ones coming in. And so that's an important piece when we look at scenario 4. Any questions about that? About the current boundaries? Okay. So now we go to scenario 4, which was in a really fairly good spot for taking to community, really looking at relieving certain schools and helping to increase numbers in others. And so what you have here is if you look at the 5-year, which we kind of want to focus on, you're pretty darn good. Presumpscot has a a big pop-up, and that's a you know, it's your smallest population, and so smaller increases are going to look much larger. And so it's not an actual ton of increase in students, but it is an increase of students, and it's getting up to that 80% mark. And yeah.
Sorry, quick question about that, because Presumpscot, I live in that sort of area that we were talking about moving from Lyseth to Presumpscot. And so I guess I'm wondering if part of that increase that we're seeing is the deliberate attempt to increase Presumpscot's population.
I don't think it was, well, this was an attempt to increase Presumpscot's current population. We were not looking at growth at the time.
No, but sorry, I might not be explaining the question very well,
Yeah.
but can you scroll up
Yeah.
to the top? So the 24-25 data is, I guess, these are scenario statistics. So, but this is current time, like, is the 24-25 column on this page the same as the 24-25 column on the existing?
No, and that's, so we're looking at, now we're looking at, where are we? Now we're looking at current boundaries as opposed to scenario
Okay.
4 boundaries.
So this is like the 24-25 column here is if we had the scenario 4 boundaries now, even though we don't, but that's
Correct,
what we would be
correct.
looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can see that if we were looking at Presumpscot, you can see that there is an increase in Presumpscot, but not as much of an increase as you see here, because you're taking on more students, and it depends on the students living there. Also, again, a 6 student increase could, you know, it's a much larger percentage than actual growth of actual students, if you know what does that make sense? Smaller impact looks larger for smaller populations. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And then this is Reiki and Roe. This is one piece that you all worked really hard to try to we were focused on Longfellow. Longfellow brought up to 76. Roe and Reiki, and this is something that we can talk about in this meeting, but the idea was to try to reduce the utilization at Reiki. That worked. However, this is what we weren't anticipating, is this drop in population. So that's going down to 10% in the 5 and then stabilizes. And then we see the opposite happening at Roe. And that's one thing. Those are the crystal ball pieces that we just didn't have. And so this disparity might be something that we can look further at. Everybody else looks pretty good and stable. So yes, Priscilla.
Yeah, I also put it in the chat. I know a lot of families couldn't make it to the listening session, but I actually had a lot of families reaching out to me just to share concerns about Wayman Street and Grant Street specifically. I think it's a big community, and it's most families work in agriculture, seafood, and they depend on each other. And the fact that I, to be honest, didn't even notice that we split that session into 2 different schools. That was a big concern for that community.
And Priscilla, is that area in here?
Reiki, yes, it's Reiki, and now we would be going, I believe, to Ocean.
Yeah, so this area here.
It's Grant and Waymont Street.
Okay.
I think that green is East End, isn't it?
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
The green is East End, but Waymont, it's going to Ocean, is on the other side.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I don't know if you can zoom in. I know if there's a way to zoom in to see the street's name.
Yes, hold on. So it went from Reiki to Ocean Ave?
Yeah, that was their concern. And I honestly didn't notice that because I knew this would, I know this would be a problem, but I didn't caught that. So that was my bad. But I knew Grant Street was going to be a problem for many of our families because I know a lot of families there, but I didn't know we had split Weymouth, and I can't see Weymouth on this map. Let me see.
And Priscilla, Kate asked a really great question in the chat. Was the
Mm.
concern that the community was being split or that they would be changing schools?
It was concerned about the community being split because they help each other getting the kids to
Yeah.
school.
Great.
Now it would be an early start and a late start school, which would be even harder for them.
Yeah.
Is Weymouth the same as 77?
No, it's to the west there. It's the shorter street that connects Park Ave to Congress. Yes. The other way.
Other ways.
Yeah.
Weymouth is actually still in Reiki. It's keep going
Yeah, it
left.
looks like
Yeah,
Deering is the one that would get split, which I mean.
Yeah, so
that
Weymouth is that
Oh,
next,
there's
yeah, right
Weymouth.
there.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, okay. Wayman is still at Reiki. So what we have split is just Grant Street.
Grant north of Sherman.
Yeah.
From Deering to Forest north of Sherman, including Grant. And I think that this is the area too that was the main difference between scenario 5 and scenario 4. I think Annie had brought up some feedback about this area, and we rolled it back and went back to Reiki in scenario 5. And then that pushed Reiki up. But however, it's important to think of this in terms of the forecast now. And if you have Reiki going from 61% down to 51%, it could actually minimize impact and increase Reiki's numbers. Now, the another piece to keep in mind is if Roe is increasing, who can take on Roe students, since we have pushed a lot of students or reassigned in these scenarios, a lot of students into Longfellow to increase Longfellow's utilization, and also to bring up some of the economically disadvantaged inequity in the district. So it's a lot to say, but I think that there could be some closer looks into this area. And then as far as taking students on from Roe, Talbot is a really hard one because there's a bit of a transportation desert going through here. And so it's hard in the school location. It's hard to move students from here to Talbot because it's hard to get them up there. It's I don't know about difficulty, but I know that you all had talked about this area to Reiki. And then the other piece is this exchange between Roe and Longfellow. There's not a ton of students that live right here. And if you keep going out, you're getting really close to the school, the actual site of the school. Sorry, that was a lot. Yes, Ariel.
I'm wondering, can you go back for a second, McKay, to the scenario 4 that's from your PowerPoint today that shows the projections?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you. Because yeah, so it's tricky because trying to fix this problem of the numbers going down for Reiki and going up for Row in the 5 and 10-year forecast, and then also what Priscilla brought up about that section that's being moved from Reiki to Ocean. It just feels like so many of the like switches and swaps we make at this point are sort of like they have pros and cons in like all of the delicate factors we're trying to balance. But I guess I'm curious, like, one of the reasons that we wanted to, I mean, we had talked about wanting to decrease the population at Reiki because folks had shared that the population there like has a lot of support needs, and it's helpful if there are fewer kids there. I guess Row, you know, I've always felt a little concerned about the geography of it just because it's, you know, a much more like spread out population and so just a much bigger catchment area. But if we were, for instance, to take that area that we were talking about around Grant Street and put it back in Reiki, and then there isn't really a whole lot available to us to move kids out of Row. Do folks who are familiar with that school and that community feel like Row could be, you know, comfortable over the years at that 82-83% mark? The only other school that we're looking at operating around that high of its capacity is Lyseth, but like, could that potentially be appropriate and absorbed at Row? Does anyone have insight on that?
Well, I can share my opinion around that topic. I think it's not only about Row, I think it's about any school. Right now, we're talking about boundaries. I don't think we are talking about the support in each school, because if you think about it, if we're sending this amount of kids to Longfellow, they're gonna need more support. So that's another additional work that I think the district's gonna have to think about it. I do believe that Row will need additional support. That's my belief, but I don't think it should stop us from moving on with this work.
Thanks, Priscilla. Damon, go ahead. And then we gotta see if we have kind of consensus around the direction of what this forecast tells us.
Yeah,
So,
it
go
might
ahead.
be nice to go back to the scenario 4 forecast with the numbers. But basically, yeah, I think it might make sense to move some of the some of the students from in the Parkside area back to Reiki, also for the reason of the neighborhood cohesion goal. I think there are good reasons not to split students on the street. I think it's Sherman and Deering. So maybe we'd look at that, and I think there's a real issue with some of this. I think we've discussed this earlier. The getting the utilization too high but too low is also a problem. And that 50% number really seems like it's getting into what we've talked about. It's some territory we don't want to necessarily get into. And thinking of the error bars I brought up earlier, I don't think it's likely that the Reiki neighborhood would see a lot of potential for unexpected growth in the population, but the Ocean Ave and Row schools certainly could. So if we do move a few students out of Ocean back into Reiki, I think that would be a useful thing. So that's something to consider. And then if we look at maybe moving some of the boundary between Row and Reiki, might be worth looking at potentially.
Yeah, I think, Damon, what you just suggested, like I'm curious from the group, like what other people think about that. So potentially like making some changes to get that longer range for Reiki up. so the utilization is not quite as low. Are people okay with that? That also takes into consideration the neighborhood that Priscilla brought up and that we've, gone back and forth for. Is there anybody that wouldn't support that? Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anybody. I also think that part of this is like I think about like Reiki going, the utilization going down does, I think, address kind of the critiques that we were hearing about there not being like enough movement in Reiki and the changes that we were making. And I think if we can't balance the other things, but we can, more balance the utilization, I think that that seems like a good move. And there's a thought in the chat. It just leaves the question of whether we do anything to try to bring rho down a bit. I would be in favor of that if we could figure out a way to, so looking at ocean, Reiki, and rho, trying to balance those out a bit, and then taking into consideration that Grant Street neighborhood, that makes sense to me. So thinking about this scenario, if we were able to make those changes, I'm going to say those again, just so that we all have them in our head. Bringing rho down a bit and Reiki up a bit in the longer term plans that probably will impact ocean as well, but I don't think there's a specific ask around ocean, but there is a specific ask around the Grant Street neighborhood, making sure that those are all together. Yeah, Ariel, go ahead.
It just sounded from what McKay was saying, like there isn't going to really be a lot we're going to be able to do to bring rho down without significantly impacting the delicate balance that we made in other places, because there are geographical barriers on the border with Talbot. Longfellow is already seeing a lot of changes. And if we're putting that Grant Street neighborhood back in Reiki, we don't want to add too much more. So I guess I'm still curious, and maybe there aren't a ton of folks in the meeting who can speak to rho, but I think it may be our best option. It may end up being our best option to just leave things the way they are with rho, even though it leaves rho's utilization higher than all the rest of the schools.
Damon, go ahead. Damon, did you want to say something?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, so I'd agree with that. I think at minimum, we should look at moving those blocks in Parkside back over to Reiki. But as far as rho, it's very difficult based on our previous conversations and factors we've looked at to really address that the utilization there without upsetting other considerations. I do think 82% is not a deal breaker. It's not a, it's within the tolerable range for sure. Whereas the 50% seems like it's not for Reiki. So I think we can, I think we should look at what that does for us and then consider changes to rho, but I don't think it's likely we're going to really want to make a lot of changes to it, all else being equal.
Okay, are there any other thoughts there?
I guess one more thought to add. So if you look at the geography, there is that section of 295 on the east side of 295 that abuts Reiki, kind of where the cursor is. That's 295. So on the east side of that is a natural barrier. So, but it also is, I think it has a lot of lower income housing, and I think it would change the demographics in a way we wouldn't really want to see it Reiki, and the ED percentage would increase, I would think. Now, it may be worth looking at, because I could be wrong about that. So I think if anything, that might make some sense, especially because 295 is just such a barrier for transportation. But I'm not sure. I would like to hear how other people feel about it and whether they want to see that or.
Any other thoughts on that? So then I think that oh, Ariel, did you have a thought? I saw you come off mute
Well, I
there.
was gonna ask if McKay, if she could zoom in on that area. I'm not convinced there's a lot of housing in
I
that.
don't think that, yeah, there may not be
area.
that much housing.
There's Mercy's campus.
So I think, and I've got to get us moving to middle schools just so that we get there tonight. But it sounds like that we do have consensus around moving ahead with the scenario, but making changes so that Reiki's utilization goes up with the inclusion of Grant Street, and then potentially looking at other areas that might have small changes.
Can I
So
ask a clarification to, when you say Grant Street, there are these 3 blocks that I know that that's what you're talking about, but I'm assuming that you are also including this block between Forest and High Street, or is that not included? When you say these
Yeah.
blocks, I'm assuming it's these 3 blocks and not this, or should I include this as well?
Priscilla or anybody else, do you have insight?
I was pretty much concerned about Grant Street. High Street, in my opinion, it's not a big problem. So if that's not going to make a lot of difference, I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's a lot of students on High Street.
Okay. So
Yeah.
just really quickly, I'm going to do a fist of 5 so that we just have formally captured this. And again, actually, let me see if I could just share my screen quickly.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we have fist of 5, 0 and 1 block a consensus, and 3 through 5 will get us a consensus. So on the count of 3, you're going to show your support for moving this scenario ahead with the changes to the Reiki utilization. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we'll hold your hands just a minute longer. Okay, great. Looks like we have consensus. So thank you for that. That's super helpful. And then I think we'll move on to our middle school models.
Great. Let me switch screens here. Since I have a whole new map with the forecast. So we're going back to middle school. So middle school, share. Okay. Okay, so middle school was meant to kind of investigate. I don't know if y'all can remember way back to scenarios 2 and 4, I believe. But it was meant to be a bit of a smush. And when kind of digging into this and talking, we were also talking about safety at the middle school level as opposed to elementary school, where you might have a lot more independence at the middle school level, so a lot more want to cross those busier streets, as I'm sure my son is doing right now with his lemonade stand, and hopefully making good choices. But so there was input here about can we split this up with the concept of safety in mind, and also minimizing impact. This is what we wound up on. It is, I'm going to talk through elementary school splits, but in a second, but let's look at the results of this. This brings Lincoln and King right in line to about 61%. It does increase more up to 68%. When we look at the comparative values along with economically disadvantaged, we see that King is utilization comes down by the largest percent, more comes up by the largest percent, minus 10% for King, up by 8% for more. Not as big of an impact on economically disadvantaged as the prior scenarios, but you do have a decrease at King down to 67% with Lincoln, and more at 52 and 57%. More does increase from 46.4% to 56.9%. And again, we are just talking, we are not including forecasts in this. We cannot forecast demographic information, and so this is any demographic information that we'll discuss is all going to be based on current students. So the priority is safety, and then balancing, minimizing impact, trying to balance the split feeders. This does increase it to 5 splits, which I believe you currently have. But it is the lowest impact at 92 students would be impacted. The largest impact from this scenario would be students that live within King. Over there on East End would be reassigned to Moore. That's where you see also your largest difference in economically disadvantaged percentages going from King to Moore. And so that would be the largest impact. These are much smaller impacts, and they're in these smaller neighborhoods that contain less students, but are across the street from their elementary school that they're assigned to. So with that, I'm going to dig into the actual splits. Because it is a little confusing, because we're looking at the black outline here is your current middle schools. So you can see this area here is currently assigned to Moore. In this case, it would be assigned to Lincoln, as well as that would look the same on the Longfellow attendance area side. Here, there's a small little sliver that is currently assigned to Lincoln that would be reassigned to Moore. You do have some of this area here that is currently assigned to Moore that would be reassigned to King. Some smaller pieces here that would be reassigned from Lincoln to King. And then this area here that would be reassigned from King up to Moore. So this is where you're getting the primary impact to students, is in this area, this hatched area. The purple dotted line, it was yellow before, but I felt like it wasn't popping, is the scenario 4 attendance areas. And so I'm gonna go back into here and go to here, just so that we can look at that overlay. I'm going to take off existing middle school boundaries, and so that you can see where the splits would be. So this is Longfellow here. Oh no, sorry, I'm Rowe here. Rowe would be split, but it would be split in a way that would have more equal distribution of population, going to Lincoln and then to King, with maybe some better geography pieces here. Then you have Longfellow. Longfellow would be split along here. There's more population in here than in the split area. So that would be a little inequitable as far as smaller communities, but not so small that you're taking, 1 or 2 streets out and they have to go to a different middle school. Let's see, Reiki would be a straight feeder. East End would be split here, and there is a larger population on this side than on this side of East End. Ocean Avenue would be split pretty much in the middle. That would be a half split between Moore and King. You would have Presumpscot would be a straight feeder. And then you'd have Lyseth would be a straight feeder, but you would create this split feed with Lyseth, with Talbot, with a very small population going to Moore instead of going to Lincoln with the rest of their cohort. And I will say that kind of idea or concept was because of the road here, and I believe the railroad as well. You guys know the area better than I do, but that's where that was coming from. So would love to field some questions, trying to get splits to be more equitable than they currently are. But that's the results of middle school scenario 5.
McKay, really quick, would you be able to put up the existing
Yes.
really quick, just so that we can see the comparison? And then Damon, go ahead and jump in with your question.
Yeah, well, I'll say I like this scenario. I was looking at it. I have some suggestions for maybe a few minor changes. I do like the idea of trying to avoid splits in the cohorts. So I do wonder if we might consider avoiding the split in Talbot and just having that be a straight feeder to Lincoln. That's my first suggestion to look at. And then the other one might be East End School. I wonder if we should look at keeping that cohort together and have that be a straight feeder as well to Moore. So otherwise, I think it's fine. There's unavoidable splits. If we did make those couple of changes I suggested, then the only elementary schools that would be split would be Rowe, Longfellow, and Ocean. And based on the geography, I think it's pretty hard to avoid that without having other changes that we don't want to see. So so yeah, those are my suggestions, and for more discussion about it.
Thank you, Damon. What other thoughts or questions do people have? Go ahead, Priscilla.
Yeah, it's just a question. It is there a specific, because I think right now it's like this as well. Is there a specific reason why we have this island near East End going to Moore? Is there a reason why we have that cohort going to Moore rather than King? Because right now it's split too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It seems to me
the
to
current
be
one
like
goes down here.
It just seemed to be too very isolated, I don't know if it has to do with transportation. I don't know if there's, I don't know the reason about that. I'm just questioning what was the reasoning about that, if anyone knows.
I do not know the answer to the current boundaries, but I do have I would think that maybe this would be socioeconomic, would be a potential driving force for this small island going up here. It definitely is the this area here, including this area, is how more increases in economically disadvantaged percentage, and how King is lowered. So I don't know about this area originally. I couldn't speak to that, and maybe somebody else has information, but that would be my assumption, just knowing from a demographic and population concept.
My concern about Talbot was also one of my concerns, just like it's a very small cohort that it's going to go to a different middle school. But I also don't know if the reason behind this is because we brought it up in the last meeting, the safety concern around Stevens Ave. So I don't know if that was the reason why we did this. But yeah, that's in my opinion, that doesn't look too well. It's not going to be a lot of students going to another school.
And just to follow up on that, could you go through the elementary schools one more time and say in this proposal how many splits they have?
I muted myself, sorry, yes. So in this scenario, row would be again, we're talking about scenario 4. The changes that were suggested recently would not change these splits unless something were to happen differently with row, but just so that everybody knows that this is a conversation from one scenario to another. So talking about scenario 4 elementary, you would have row would be split along here. Larger population to the north, smaller population to the south, but not an isolated community. You would have Longfellow would be split, again, larger population to the north, less population to the south. However, there's safety pieces here and a closeness piece as well, where if all of Longfellow went to Talbot, went to Lincoln, you'd really be dipping down and potentially sending kids that are really close to King all the way up to Lincoln. Reiki would be a true feeder. Lyseth and Presumpscot would be true feeders, but Ocean Avenue would be split. That's a pretty good distribution of population to the north and south for Ocean Avenue. East End would be split with a larger population going to more than a smaller population that would go to King. And then Talbot would be split just along this small piece here. There's not a lot of students that live here, but they would be split from Talbot. So these students would go to Moore, and these students would go to Lincoln. Did I get all of them? Is that helpful?
Thank you. Are
We
there
have 1, 2,
yeah.
3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
With the only the 5th one being a much smaller neighborhood.
And it does seem like that there's more like sense, for lack of a better word, about the way that the splits happen and less like little carve outs.
Yes, especially consider when comparing to current,
Yes.
because you have these weird pop outs here that we've kind of all talked about, except for Talbot. So everything else is a much better, more meaningful, not meaningful, less impact to smaller communities.
Yeah. And did anybody else have any thoughts or questions or kind of like things that they would like to explore with this scenario?
Just an idea, okay? But I can imagine that it would probably be a big change. But if, for example, if that Talbot piece comes to Lincoln, and that smaller portion, for me it's small, but I don't know how many kids are in there. I imagine it's big. The rest of East End goes to Lyman. Would that be a big difference? So East End would only be all going to Lyman more, and then Talbot would all be going to Lincoln.
So it would push more up in utilization because there's a larger population here, I believe. I could look into that though. That came up with Damon as well as like, could we make this a true feeder, 2 more, and then in this area, it wouldn't, there's a very small population, so it wouldn't, it would likely make King's numbers go down a bit, Moore's numbers go up, and then not have too much of an impact between Lincoln. It wouldn't be a lift to Lincoln is what I'm trying to say. Not much. But that is something that we can, I'm happy to investigate on the next round. I think you might be muted.
Oh, I'm definitely muted. Thank you, McKay. So Damon also put a note in the chat. I support making both Talbot and Easton true feeders. If we do both, the impacts on middle school would cancel out somewhat. Can Damon, can you say more what you mean the impacts?
Yeah,
on middle school?
so basically, well, we'd be moving some more students into more, but with the East End change, but then we'd be moving a few out with the Talbot change. And maybe it's not a lot, but at least the directions would be opposite of each other. So, you know, I think that it's worth looking at least. And I do like the idea of getting us down to only 3 elementary schools that split.
Yeah, so it sounds like that there might be some appetite for looking at creating less elementary schools that are split. So I'm watching what McKay's doing and trying to talk at the same time.
I actually just
Yeah.
investigated it, and it might actually work out to a good advantage. Like it might actually, I didn't realize there really are, and you all probably know this, but there really are not a ton of students here. So I may have misspoke. There's a much larger population over here and a much smaller population in this area. So making it a true feeder would not be a huge step. And if that's what community has interest in, and there'd be buses down there anyways, then it could be something to investigate from a scenario perspective.
Great. So I think like if we could take this scenario and work on getting Easton and Talbot to be true feeders, you could play around with that, McKay, for the next scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so this would still, we'd get to look at another draft of it before it goes on to the community. Sorry, I have a barky dog here today. Anything else that we want McKay to look at? I know we're at time.
It's a maybe, but maybe looking at moving the area between 295 and St. John Street from Row to Reiki. It's
Okay.
You know, just for a what if.
Yeah. So adding those two pieces. McKay, you feel like you've got your directives on this? Okay.
Yep, I will play around with that.
Yeah. And so is there a way where that would be helpful to give feedback on new scenarios before the next meeting? Do you mean like Ariel getting those new scenarios before the meeting?
Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure how where we're at in our process versus where you want us to be, and whether we're feeling behind or we're feeling good.
So I think that we're feeling good. Our next meeting is on August 28th. I think it would be great if we could get the middle school proposal to final, and then we'd be prepping for the community outreach sessions, which will happen in October. So I think that like, and Superintendent Scallon jump in, the next meeting will be also looking at like the policy pieces that would overlay on that. Is that right?
When you say the policy pieces, in terms of implementation?
Yes.
Or- yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think that McKay, if we can connect off of this and see if we can meet next week to look at those changes, we could then get to the committee something where they could give some offline feedback.
Yes, that should work.
Yeah, and just acknowledging materials didn't get out until right up against this meeting, just because of vacations and where everybody was over the summer. But hopefully we'll be able to get that next batch to you sooner. But you can always just email Superintendent Scallon and myself, and we can get any feedback or questions to McKay in the meantime. Beautiful. Okay, good work, everyone. Well done, well done. And now you get to go to your other meetings or pick up your children or maybe go outside. The sun has not set yet, so you can hopefully find some sunshine. But we'll see you on the 28th for the next meeting. Take good care.